Hey everybody, Ty here. I hope everyone is doing well. We're coming in with another update tonight in regards to the severe weather threat for Saturday here. Now, we're within the 72-hour time frame, so a little bit more information is available to us. That's kind of why I didn't make a big push on trying to do a video last night, because we were kind of in a weird spot with the model data. We're still kind of limited, but more is going to become available to us throughout the course of today. We'll probably follow up with a live stream discussion depending on if this were to ramp up at all. But something's kind of telling me that it might not end up being that way. There are a couple parameters that I'm going to go over with, particularly in this one, that would lead me to any sort of reasoning behind maybe an upgrade with this, but I find it to be rather unlikely at this time. But if we were to go ahead and get into things here in regards to our threat area, not much has really changed from when we initially had I think it was day 6 outlook or day 5 outlook initially come out for this. A lot of the same areas, Mississippi River Basin, we have parts of the Ohio Valley in there, the extreme western parts for the most part, and then of course over towards the Ozarks has been the most favored area out of all the others in regards to this threat. So we're getting a little bit more along the lines of clarity in regards to our storm mode here, but pretty much these areas have remained the same from Evansville, areas west of Evansville, I should say, all the way up towards maybe southern parts of Missouri, eastern parts of Oklahoma, pretty much the entire state of Arkansas, parts of northeast Texas, and northern Louisiana are going to be the points of interest. If we were to go ahead and take a look at model data, and we're going to do things a little differently here. Normally I'll use the GFS and Euro, but since we're looking at more of a short range event, I have a little bit more to choose from here. And today we're going to go with the RAP model, to rapid refresh model. So data comes in with this one pretty consistently. So this is some pretty new data that's come in. I'll have to wait 6 hours for a model update here. So we're going to look at two different levels of the atmosphere. We're going to be using the same model throughout this video here, but we're just going to be more or less making comparisons at this point. We're going to be looking at the upper and mid levels of the atmosphere, and I'm hoping that this decides to go here in the bottom left corner. There it goes. It's just being a little bit difficult. But this is the situation. We have this trough that's a little further up to the north that's going to be ejecting out, and it's going to be this feature down here further towards the south that's going to be the catalyst behind our severe weather. We do have this little reinforcing area that comes in behind this and kind of helps get everything going here. The thing with this is, however, we're going to end up seeing more of a linear mode kind of come into play as a result of that. I'm losing more and more confidence by the minute or by each run in regards to the threat of prefrontal cells. I still think that they're possible, but I find them to be a little bit less likely. And I mean, we don't really have some of the highest of high resolutions with this as well, so it's still kind of variable. So I'm still not ruling it out completely, but it's going to be a little bit harder to pick it up on this one. It would have been the same thing with the GFS and the Euro. The Euro might have had a better chance of picking up on that, but the Euro's always been the weaker of the two solutions for the most part throughout this time frame in which we've covered this event. So we're still kind of balancing things out, and there's still a lot more questions that I have with this system. But you can kind of see this coming into play here. You can see the diffluence beginning to come in at the end of the model run here. We'll go ahead and pause that. Go ahead and pause both of these actually. We'll kind of fast forward here. This is the area of interest that we have here. And I do see a little bit more diffluence out ahead of what is likely to be the frontal boundary at this point. The low pressure is going to be somewhere tucked away in here, and the front would most likely arch in this direction. And it's going to be out ahead of that where we have our chances for our showers and thunderstorms. So right along this corridor here is where I would expect things to really ramp up. I do think the point of initiation might be a little bit earlier in the afternoon. And if I were to move the 700 millibar map along here, what you would be looking for, and it's a little bit harder to see. I'm actually going to change the region on there so that way you can see it a little bit more clearly. But what you want to be looking for, if it would load within the next 10 billion years, are these short waves that you're seeing over here. What we're looking at right now is over towards northeastern parts of Oklahoma heading into Arkansas. This is where we're going to have our lifting mechanism for our storms to develop. The thing is, though, these do emerge a little bit earlier in the day as well. So the time in which these would end up initiating is also going to be a crucial factor as well. So the forecast is still kind of complicated, but like I said, we're starting to get down to the nit and grit here in regards to finally figuring out what we're going to be dealing with. If the other parameters such as CAPE and moisture are a little bit more on the sufficient side earlier in the day, I think we would have maybe a few more prefrontal cells. The thing is, I think with the lack of forcing that we would have here, depending on the region, as this trough is still deepening as we get later into the day, could also either help or hurt these storms. If the trough kind of deepens a little earlier, we end up with a situation where we have a much more linear storm mode. But if it's weaker, like what we're seeing right now based off the wrap, we might end up having either a prefrontal mode that's really organized or a really messy storm mode with heavy rain showers, which actually could limit the event as a whole. So, like I said, there's a whole lot of moving parts with this. This is probably going to be, like I said before, really just a headache, the forecast leading up to the event itself. So let's go ahead and now take a look at the low-level jet. I've been kind of putting this off over the last few days, mainly due to the fact that I'm not really sure of which of the scenarios that we've had up to this point have won out, were going to win out. And really, we ended up seeing a new scenario develop out of all the models that we were looking at originally with the GFS and Euro. So just a really messy situation across the board. It looks like the low-level jet really starts to ramp up right around sunset, which is about normal, I would say. But depending on the timing of this, I would say that the biggest tornado threat potentially, given the low-level jet we have available here, is going to have more to do around sunset right along the Oklahoma and Arkansas line here. There is another pocket that pops up here that we'll have to watch too. But I think limited forcing or large scale ascent might keep that threat at bay a little bit. We're going to do a quick little sounding over this, and I haven't done these in a minute, so I might have picked an absolute trash area. I'm going to try to pick something over here. I really think that we're going to have a hard time picking up much of anything significant based off the looks that I have here. I think that with the amount of instability we have available, but just the lack of low-level jet here, it's going to keep things a bit more on the limited side. There's still going to be more variability as to what we end up seeing a little bit further off to the north and south of our areas of interest. So, like I said, it's going to be one of those touch-and-go types of situations. We may end up getting absolutely nothing out of this, too. I'd still say at this point just about anything is possible with these. But yeah, this is kind of why I was thinking that upgrades with this aren't too likely. And I'm glad I haven't been seeing too much going on in regards to the hype train with this one as well. It's not going to be, no one's been hyping it up to be a big tornado outbreak or anything of the like, and we hope that it stays that way. So a couple of parameters that I'm looking at, of course, is the moisture. And the moisture is abundant. We do have plenty of flow from the Gulf here. We have 60 to 70 degree dew points, which is what you would be looking for. And that's going to actually start to deepen as we get later into the evening in coherence with the trough, as well as it begins to deepen. So there's going to be plenty of moisture out ahead of these storms to keep them going into the overnight. I do think that for these areas that are more within the marginal risk, I wouldn't expect much of anything until maybe the overnight hours. And that's also going to help keep that severe weather threat lower, because we won't have as much in the way of instability to work with that loss of daytime heating. Really, like I said, it's these regions a little further to the south that kind of pique my interest a little bit more. We do have a couple areas a little further up towards the region that could have something a little bit more sufficient. Really, it doesn't take that much CAPE to get severe weather going. You could really get anything to pop off with about 700 to 800 joules per kilogram. These areas in the blue are about 1,000. The reason why everyone's so interested in this region is because the amount of energy we have here. This thunderstorm juice is about at 2,000 to 2,200 joules per kilogram. Might be an isolated pocket where we even get above 2,500. if I were to view the sounding over this would be a little bit more favorable. Again, though, one of the big limiting factors we have with this is lower level winds just aren't quite as impressive. It's still pretty good, I would say, at this point. We're dealing with low level winds about at the surface of the about maybe 5,000 feet up, being at about close to 20 knots, I would say. Maybe a little bit less, a little bit variable, but it's just sufficient enough to maybe get a tornado going there. And like I said, if these storms can end up taking off over this region, which again, it's still possible, but it's not the best environment that I've seen. Like I said, we could be talking about something. But it seems like the threat seems to be more of an early to mid-afternoon type of deal. As we get later into the evening, we're going to definitely start to favor more of those damaging winds, and with the instability beginning to fade, with the sun beginning to set, as you can see here at the end of the model run, it would just further kind of drive home my thought that we aren't going to see this be like a long duration event or massive outbreak, or at least not at this time, I should say. We could end up seeing an easy 180 by the time we get to Saturday morning. So, a couple other things I'm going to do here before we end this video, because we're just about done. Right now, we're trying to look at the storm mode, and again, I think this is really going to be the make or break for the day. It does look like we have some early activity that could hamper development over here. We do get a little frontal area of showers and thunderstorms. It's most likely an MCS, and then things just kind of develop continually throughout the day. This will ultimately use up a degree of the instability that's available towards these regions. So if these storms don't take off, we don't get any prefrontal activity early in the day, the storm threat's going to end up being pretty much nil by the time we get later into the evening. But if we don't use up the energy that's available here, we'll have a very strong line of thunderstorms that are capable of all three hazards. In particular, I'm thinking damaging winds here. Like I said, there's going to be maybe a couple of hot spots where we have chances for tornadic activity. And again, the area is a little bit further off towards the north and east over here, let's say over towards Illinois and Indiana. You do have some development that pops up here, but it's just not really looking all that impressive towards the region. I do think the lack of forcing may have a little something to do with that. And then lack of moisture. I mean, we still get into those 60-degree dew points, but we kind of struggle with that a bit here. Let's go ahead and actually move let's go ahead and move that other parameter we're showing in the bottom left corner of the screen over to the main part here. So what I'm trying to do is give you an idea of not just the storm mode that we're dealing with at this point, but also the conditions, because I know there have been a couple of you that might actually be going out in the middle of this. So the big thing with this setup is there's going to be a lot of moisture available as a whole, a lot of precipitable water. So if you do end up under a stronger storm, expect there to be heavy precipitation. These are going to be high precipitation cells if we do get anything discrete. So expect it to be the typical Dixie Alley setup where everything's really messy, really hard to see anything. It's just pretty much a slop fest, I would say, at this point. And that's going to be persistent even as we go into the evening and overnight hours if you're planning to chase after dark here. I wouldn't recommend chasing unless you are a trained professional, of course. But for those of you that are on here watching that, that's pretty much what we can expect at this point. But that being said, appreciate you all tuning in for this one. I'll have, like I said, I'm probably going to do a live stream discussion tomorrow depending on how things trend. Might just be a regular video if things stay the same, but we'll probably have a better idea once the convective models come in, which should be probably mid to late afternoon in my case, since I'll be off work then. But again, can't say it enough how much appreciate you guys all being here. You all stay safe. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, especially if you're new around here. And I will see you guys in the next one. Have a wonderful rest of your evening.